Good afternoon. Welcome to African Voices platform. My name is Chiwe Chihana, and I am going to be talking to the diaspora community from Rwanda today. I'll be joined by my co-host, Enoch Karimba. Hi, Enoch.
Hello, Chiwe.
Thank you. Enoch, we've got a very brilliant lineup today, and especially that we'll be looking at 26 years since the Rwandan Genocide. Today, this year in particular is very different in terms of commemoration. So would you like to introduce our guests today then?
Hello. Our guests today, we have Anais Mutumba and Eric Murangwa. They're both London-based, and they're Rwandans as well.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot for joining us, Anais. Hi.
Hi.
And hello there. Is it Eric or Eugene? Because I saw you got two names. Which one do you prefer?
Whichever works for you.
Lovely. All right. Thanks. Really honored to have both of you on the platform today. Anais, your profile is just I'm probably more related to what you do. I also think I have many hats and I don't want to be defined in one way. So you're amazing and it's really good to have you. But how would you describe yourself in relation to Rwandese heritage as well as the genocide?
Probably very, very lucky because I and my family were able to get out a month before it all started. And that was because at the age of 6, I wanted to be a vet. And I was absolutely certain of that. And my mom was like, well, you can't really be a vet here because pets weren't considered in the same way as maybe they are now. And definitely not how they're considered in the West. So it didn't really make sense to be a vet. And I obviously know she didn't base her whole life decision on a 6-year-old, but we did move to South Africa. And when we landed in South Africa, we saw everything on the news, which obviously wasn't quite as obvious in Rwanda itself. So we were able to warn family members to get out, some of them. And so, but yeah, I'm not a vet. So I got to 18 and I couldn't get an A in physics, which only makes up 5% of the course. So I don't actually understand why it was so important. But yeah, and then so I had to rethink my career and I kind of deviated into the sciences and journalism. So it's very, very eclectic, really, in one word.
Brilliant. That's lovely. Thanks a lot. Eric, so your roots are really in football, and football is what saved you from actually becoming a statistic of the Rwandese genocide. Could you tell us more about yourself as well?
Thank you. Before I answer your question, I just want to make a correction on the terminology that you are using. It's important to point out that Rwandan genocide is no longer used as a term to define what took place in Rwanda 26 years ago. So since January 26, 2018, the UN adopted a new resolution to rename the genocide in Rwanda as 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. So it's very important when we discussing this kind of topic that the right terminology is also used. So please,
thank you. No, thank you.
Let's make sure that we correct that. So yeah, going back to your question, yes, my background, my story is all about how football saved my life during the genocide against the Tutsi 26 years ago. I was a football player, played for the biggest football club in Rwanda called Rayon Sport. And thanks to that status of a footballer, I was able to receive quite a lot of support from teammates, fans, and that basically helped me to survive the genocide. So yeah, I describe myself as a former Rwandan international footballer and survivor of 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and that today I consider myself as a genocide campaigner, a genocide education campaigner, because that's what I do on a daily basis. I go out in schools and communities to talk about what happened and to try and use the lessons from Rwanda for communities here to basically, learn from the terrible past of ours and prevent any kind of these atrocities happening here or anywhere else in the world.
Thanks a lot. Can I just latch onto your, I mean, your correction, and I really appreciate that. And also, you've just talked about prevention of the recurrence of what happened in Rwanda those many years ago. And obviously, there's been so much strides that have been made in Rwanda. But Eric, I just wondered how, in the context of Rwanda's policy itself internally, being that you, it's advisable not to define yourselves on the lines of Hutsis, Tutsis, or Twas. How does that resonate? How do you think that's transitioning since 2018?
It has. I don't think that does affect how Rwandans deal with this issue of ethnicity. In fact, in my view, it helps us to understand more why it's important to know, to define ourselves, in these categories. Genocide took place based on this baseless, identity. If we don't put it out there for people to understand that people were targeted and almost exterminated because of how they were labeled, then we may be lacking something in terms of pointing out why we don't need to see ourselves in this way. So it helps. It helps to be clear.
Yeah. Okay, I think I can appreciate that part of taking back ownership. Sometimes you take power back by you naming something as it's seen.
Okay.
Yeah. Anais, I was just going to ask you around a similar conversation, but you have dug quite a bit deeper into the colonial context as opposed to just, so you talk a lot, you've written about how this started way before the 94, that was just a culmination. Can you talk us through that thinking process? And then I'll get Enoch to ask you a question.
Yeah, so I was looking into it because growing up, I obviously knew what had happened, but I always thought it was a tribal thing. And so that's how it had been sort of spoken about in the Western media. So that was what I took to mean. And I hadn't really heard any different until maybe when I started doing my own research in my late teens, and I was looking into it, and I actually found out that the genocide on this, when it started in 94 was not the first time. And it was not just something that happened out of nowhere, like it had been building up over time. And that was partly because of our colonial past. And it started with the Germans, who initially came over, and they wanted to, they came for our agriculture, essentially. So yes, they caused some issues, but they didn't really upset the social status of Rwanda too much. And then the Belgians came, and obviously, as they did in Congo, they came and completely turned things upside down. And they're the ones who actually made our different titles about what we looked like, because in actual fact, the different terms had more to do with the land that you owned and how many cows you had. So you could actually move from one to the other. So you could become Hutu, so Hutu could become Tutsi, and so on and so forth. And you could lose land and become Hutu. So it was very fluid in that sense. And it didn't really have to do with us being short, tall, the width of our noses or whatever. But the Belgians made it about that, and then would stamp ID cards with that. And then, of course, that made it super hard to hide. But some were rich enough to obviously pay for their ID cards to say something different. So some people survived because of that. And it kind of just continued and became more and more about the different ways that we looked. But then they took the minority, the Tutsis, and put them in charge of the majority, and then took land from the Hutu and gave them to the Tutsi, and so on and so forth. So they really upset things. and then they just left. So after all that tension, they left us in that tension. So it was a powder keg, to be honest. It was only a matter of time. And so there's been at least 3 different times that certain things have kicked off. But 94 was sort of the culmination of everything in one go.
Thanks. Enoch, do you have anything to ask on the back of that?
Yeah, thank you, Anais. Basically, you're mentioning about the colonial past of Rwanda. Has there been any lessons, from those colonial masters, as per se, the Belgians? I mean, with all the history going back, I've never heard of any Belgian government official coming forward to apologize of their role. I mean, they built it up from 1959 all the way, up to the big explosion in 1994. And up again, there's been lessons learned year after year. But up until now, there's not been any Belgian official or a government notification to come forward and say, all to the Rwandans of all the tragedies, the genocide that befell the Tutsis in 94 was as a result of that colonialism, going back 1959. I mean, what is it that can be done for the Belgians to come forward and apologize?
I don't know if they ever will, to be honest. It's a bit sad to say, but I don't think they want to talk about it in that way. I don't think they want to maybe take the full responsibility. Obviously, that's a generalization on an entire group of people. So I'm sure there are some people who acknowledge the part that Belgium played. But I know, for example, there's been discussions where Belgians have sat down to discuss the effects of what had happened in Rwanda, but there wasn't a single Rwandan in the room. And so that already is a bit off kilter, because if you're going to discuss that and it's just all of you Belgians together and none of you are maybe a Belgian Rwandan or anything like that, then it's not really going to be a fruitful discussion. And there's a lot of Rwandans in Belgium, so it should have been easy to find an academic who could then speak on or teach them or discuss the effects. But I mean, look what they did in Congo. Congo is still feeling the effects, both parts of the Congo. So it's going to be an ongoing issue. As for lessons learned, I think they're aware. Absolutely, I'm sure that they're aware. But what we've learned is to try not label ourselves that way. I mean, it's only 26 years ago that it happened, so it's still quite fresh, if you will, but we've come so far from that point. And though there are some moments where unintentionally, in certain parts of Rwanda, there are still some people who maybe still subscribe to those labels. I don't actually think we try to do that anymore. I think we've just decided, well, we're all Rwandan, so why should we be defined by something that a colonial put upon us? Because it was originally our titles, and our titles meant landowner. So it didn't have anything to do with what we look like. So they completely transformed the meaning of that. So by taking back that narrative, we've tried to remember, well, no, this is not what it was about initially. So yeah, but as for the Belgians learning the lessons, who knows? I think even France I know the Pope very recently apologized for the impact in Rwanda. But to be fair, the entire international community did not come to our aid. So we can't just lay this solely at the hands of the Belgians when no one came to help us. They came to rescue their citizens, but they didn't actually come and help us.
Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, that's very insightful. On the back of that, I was wondering, Eric, there's all this obviously holding the international community to account, because I genuinely believe that the international community slept on this one and they have a lot to answer for. And especially that at the time there were United Nations soldiers present, actually. And so a lot more could have been done. But with the Ishami Foundation, Eric, what is it you're looking to do, and how are you looking to influence this narrative of the genocide against the Tutsis?
Thank you. Before I answer that, can I also make a comment on what Anais said, as well as Enoch. So it's true that when the Germans came, disrupted the whole, system. They favored one group of Rwandans, but a very small group of Rwandans. That is important to highlight it. When they say that they gave land to Tutsis, they didn't give land to all Tutsis. That privilege was given to the very few who were already in a privileged position. So it wasn't something that was done, massively to favor
down to everyone. It was just elite amongst that were selected, right?
Yes, yes.
That's me.
And on Enoch's point regarding the Belgium asking for forgiveness, or whatever that was they were supposed to do. Yeah, they did actually. Former Prime Minister of Belgium came to Rwanda. I can't remember the year. It was sometime in mid 2000, and he didn't apologize for what Belgium did back then in during those colonial times, but he apologized for their lack of commitment and the responsibility during the genocide, as former U.S. President Bill Clinton did, and the Pope, as Anais said. UK, the country where we're in right now, is one country that's its former leader, the man who was in charge during that period, John Major, has never even said a single word about what happened during that time. He's never commented, not what happened then, what was his responsibility or no responsibility. He has kept total silence. So that's an important point to make as well. So on what we trying to do, what we're trying to achieve with Ishami Foundation, I think it is about what Enoch was just asking a moment ago. It's about trying to find a way of making sure those lessons of our history are learned. So when we go out into schools to share our stories, there is 2 or 3 things that we're looking for. Yes, we want to make sure that people learn more about what happened to us. We want to keep the memories of our loved ones alive, but we want to make sure that the young people, especially, who will be in a position of power in years to come, will be able to understand properly how these things happen in those part of the world, so that when they in that position of power, they won't make the same mistakes as those who were in power back then did. So yeah, we're trying to use the survivors' stories to educate the people from this part of the world, which sometimes think issues of genocide and mass atrocities are issues for another world, and that's why they don't sometimes take as much attention and much responsibility to sort them out. So we hope by engaging with younger people as early as possible, that will change how they look at these kind of things.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much for that. Now, this question is probably related to the 3 of you, including my colleague Enoch, who is of Rwandese heritage as well. This year is different in the sense that COVID-19 has affected how people have commemorated the genocide against the Tutsis. Um, my understanding of it is that it's a profound time for everybody to reflect, but also it's to celebrate the strides that have been made since then, and also to embrace what Rwanda has become. For me as an African, Rwanda is a beacon in so many areas. What was it like for each of you this year not to be able to see the usual type of engagement that you've been enjoying? This makes a very big difference, I would imagine. So maybe Enoch, you could start.
Yeah, I think it is. First of all, it's been a challenge. It's something new. The environment is absolutely new to every one of us. Each and every year when we commemorate, we all come together, as a people. We remember our loved ones. We get to interact with each other. It becomes a moment of reflection for each and everyone. But ever since this pandemic began, and coming off April, when we start to commemorate, I think it became a bit of a shock to every one of us because we used to be around people, but every one of us is under lockdown. So we've had some measures put in place, across all the diaspora networks. We It hasn't stopped us from remembering, commemorating, although it's just basically about utilizing any means available. And all these means available being Zoom or Skype, all people have tried to make this. I mean, we don't want to put our positions, just because we're not meeting, as a group, nothing's going to happen. We are making sure it's happening. It's not going away. We will commemorate and remember within whichever means possible. And thank goodness, there's all these technologies, Zoom and Skype and all the rest. So it's still happening. It hasn't gone away. Although, the challenge is that we're not together as a unit.
Right. Thanks, Enoch. And Anais, how does that look for you this year? What's the impact of not commemorating as per usual?
So I moved out of London about 2 years ago, but I would still go back for the commemoration that would happen in London at a church in Marylebone. And it felt really odd this year not to go with everybody present in that space. So it did feel very strange, but what I did love is that it didn't completely derail the commemoration, because we still had all the speakers we would normally have. They just did it on video on Instagram. So on the embassies, the Rwanda embassy in the UK, their Instagram, each person that was going to speak did speak anyway. They just had a video, and then they released each video in turn as if it would have been part of the program on the day. And then, of course, we could watch President Kagame's address live. And so that was put out on Facebook. And then we had the minute of silence at the particular time. And then I know that there were various Zoom calls as well. So different people in different areas would sort of come together on a Zoom call and have that discussion. So to me, it kind of gave me hope. And I thought how great that, in the face of a world pandemic that's affecting all of us, that we could still commemorate. And then, of course, the president and the first lady still went and lit the fire of hope that they usually do every year. So that was great as well to be able to watch along live.
Brilliant. Eric, I think I have picked up that the Ishami Foundation has been doing some actual, is it fundraising or any awareness raising alongside that? But could you talk me through how things have looked like for you?
Yes. Let me first speak on how this new way of commemoration has impacted Rwandans as a whole, and survivors in particular. And now I'll tell you what Isham is doing.
Brilliant.
Like two of my fellow Rwandans have just said, he was and still is. We also have to remember the commemoration is still going on for another 2 months. because it doesn't end up until July 14th. So it was unusual to have commemoration where there is no a human contact. And this is a very important part of how we remember, how we commemorate. It's, by coming together, we actually try and reform that bond and that family, that community that was broken by the genocide. So not having that moment where we could come together, was very, very significant. And it was very, very significant, particularly for the most vulnerable members of our community. Those elderly people who no longer have anyone with them. There are families that have been pretty much, decimated, and a mother who survived alone when she had probably 5, 6, 7 children and husband all gone. That person to be commemorating in this type of environment where she was alone was very hard, and still very hard for those people, because it genuinely brings back the memories of what happened to them. So that
it's lonely. It reminds you that you're alone, and it kind of pushes towards that feeling of being on your own, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And again, being locked in the house, it also something that could trigger bad memories of how people were hidden, trying to run away from the killers. In fact, there has been cases where people suffered some mental health issues because of the impact of feeling isolated and then triggering those memories back. That's how it was. But on the other hand, it also provided an opportunity to do things in different way. In fact, people who have been following how this commemoration is taking place, they believe it has given an opportunity for more people, especially younger people, to know more about commemoration, to know more about remembrance. Because usually when we go out to those events of commemorations, doesn't always attract as many young people as they should. But this time, they had nowhere to go. They were at home. They were with their families. They had to follow whatever that was being broadcasted on national television or radio or social media in the case of us in the diaspora, and open up an interesting time to discuss about this particular issue, and which is a good thing. So we, as Ishami, I think we quickly realized how this was going to impact, our way of dealing with the commemoration, and then we wanted to find a way of responding to that. So we launched on April 7th 2 campaigns. One was sharing what we call 100 stories from Rwanda, and then messages of hope. So we shared those stories, a picture of a survivor and a quote highlighting what this time of commemoration represent to them, but mostly putting out messages of hope, messages of encouragement, because we wanted to encourage our own people, but we wanted to send a message out to the wider world. The people who are so scared, who are so desperate, they should remember that no matter what you go through, you can always rise and overcome such a thing. And if we can do that as survivors of genocide, surely anyone else can also do it. And we also launched this campaign for fundraising to try and help those most vulnerable members of our community back home who are now locked in their house because of the lockdown, and then so that they can find something to eat, so that they can find some necessities that they need to be able to continue to remember without having to focus their minds on other important issues that may affect of how they remember. So yeah, that's what we've been doing for the last almost a month now. 28 today, 21 days.
28th to 20. Yeah, it is the 28th. That's a powerful story of how survivors can actually be positive. And I think that's a story that really does speak to how I perceive Rwanda. It's that rising out of something that was so horrendous and then starting to live again and giving other people hope as well, that things can actually be done differently and better. There's also the aspect, I think, of the process of reconciliation. Anais, I note that you lived in South Africa, so they've gone through the truth and reconciliation process there. Can you draw parallels between the process in and your microphone is off, by the way, between the process in South Africa of reconciliation and how it's been done in Rwanda?
I muted it so there wasn't echo. So in terms of South Africa, they have come a long way, but I know that there's still quite a lot of things that they're working through in South Africa. So there are parallels, but I feel like in some ways, without trying to pit two countries against each other, I feel like Rwanda has come a bit further than that, in the sense that it's become a massive collaborative effort. So though we still have some tensions because it was only 26 years ago, but equally in 26 years, the massive transitions, it's been a massive 180 from what happened in 94. For example, I know that we have initially, after the genocide and what had happened, we held forgiveness tribunals, and the Rwanda word for it literally means justice in the grass. And so it was held in the outdoors. And
what's the word? Sorry, what's the word?
Eric, what's the word? I can't say it properly.
Gachacha. Gachacha.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it literally means justice in the grass. And essentially people held tribunals outside, and they were faced with the survivors of the families that they had killed, and they would forgive each other in that moment. Some obviously took a bit more time to do that. Naturally, that's understandable. I mean, they murdered your family members, so it's not a simple snap of the fingers. But some people did choose to go beyond that, and so that already meant that we were set apart from the normal processes from other countries, because we took our own sort of initiative, because we're a small country. So either we forgive each other or we don't. So there was really no middle ground to move forward. And so obviously once we had that as a foundation, it was much easier to build on that. So now we're one of the top for coffee in the world. We've got the largest member of women in parliament in the entire world. That's even above the Western world. And obviously, you've probably seen we're on the sleeves of Paris Saint-Germain and Arsenal. So it's a pretty cool partnership that I just think it's amazing, like how that came about, because in the entire history of Arsenal, they've never had a sleeve partner. So why is their first sleeve partner Rwanda? I love it. We are here for it. So there's all sorts of situations like that, massive shifts and transitions. And so, and even now they give so much weight to the young people. So I know a lot of young people are in parliament, they're helping shape some of the policies. So we're not just kind of sat there having to take things, accept things as a status quo, but we're actually like, well, no, let's change this, let's shift to this. And yeah, I just think it's amazing. I could sit here and list all the things.
Can I come in on that? Just a little bit. I think this is one thing that I really like about Africans putting their narrative out there as opposed to somebody else writing about a country. So if I was sat here and not talking to Rwandese, but talking to an academic who is working on Rwanda, their perspective of youth engagement, I think would be different to how you're narrating it. So the world would rather say, the Rwandese leadership is doing to people as opposed to people, there's no agency. But can you come back on that and just challenge that a little bit, push back on that narrative?
Oh, there's definitely a lot of us in Parliament, I can guarantee it. There's some 20, 30-year-olds making policies in agriculture. And then, of course, there's the social media aspect, and then the marketing and the news. Then, of course, there's an annual thing that every citizen gets involved in that I know a lot of young people have been on board with. And again, it's a Rwandan word I can't say, but it's the one where the whole year, once a year, we come and we clean up Rwanda. Like we physically come together to clean up the country.
Once a month. Once a month.
Once a month.
Oh, that way.
So, Eric, do you want to say the word?
And it's called Umuganda.
Umuganda, yeah, I've come across that, yeah.
And that's amazing. So that's obviously happening once a month where we're cleaning Rwanda, like we're coming together as a community regardless of age. But I understand how it could look like, because some young people are not in Rwanda, so we're obviously spread out as the diaspora. But I know that a lot of young people go to another country. So when I went to Singapore for a month, I came across a lot of young people that were there from Rwanda. And then the plan was to learn as much as they could in Singapore and then take that knowledge back to Rwanda. So I've seen a lot of people do that. So they will go somewhere, Australia or anywhere in the world, learn something, then take it back to Rwanda and be like, okay, so this is what we need to do here. This is where we need to apply this. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more youth engagement than we're given credit for.
So Enoch and Eric, the world would choose to portray that as the President Kagame ruling with an iron fist, and often the Western world tends to describe him as a dictator. Where do you fit into that space, and what do you as Rwandese have to say about that narrative?
Thanks for that question. I think everywhere you go, the Western world always have a certain perception about any African leaders. Whether an African leader does right or wrong, they will never be immune to any criticisms. Matter of fact, they are criticized when they're doing the right things. Okay. So in regards to our president, he's always been the person being put out there, by the Western countries, criticizing, labeling him as a dictator and all sorts, of things. But one particular thing that they will never, ever done is to acknowledge the positives he's done for his country.
Right. Do you feel the same, Eric? Yeah.
It's always criticisms. I mean, they're picking out things that basically serves their own agendas as Western countries. Right. I tend to say these people have no best interest for Rwanda, much as Kagame has the best interest for his own people. So it's basically the Western world against Rwanda. So it's not even the president himself. When they try to put him down, they're putting every Rwandan down.
Right. Thanks, Enoch. And Eric, what's your take on this?
Well, I absolutely agree with what Anais and Enoch said. Let me put it this way. I think earlier, I don't know if it was Enoch or Yusuf who asked the question about lesson learned.
Yeah.
Everything that goes on in Rwanda for the last 26 years they are based on that, path of what have we learned from our past. And one thing that we've learned better than anything else is we have to be the masters of our own issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's how you hear all these homemade solutions that the gachacha grassroots justice system, the communal monthly initiative, the women being promoted into position of power, changing rules such as inheritance rules, which in most of African most of African country, women have no right to the land. That has changed since the after genocide. I girl or boy, child has equal right to the land of their families, and those are different things that have happened. So going back to who is President Kagame in the eyes of us Rwandans, in the eyes of outsiders. Of course, we have different views on who is President Kagame when it comes to these two groups. We Rwandans know who he is because we see what he's done for the last 26 years. President Kagame is not a leader like any other leader. He's someone who has been shaped by his historical background, and he has put that in every step of his leadership to make sure that what he went through as he was growing up will never happen to anyone else. And then sometimes, he has to be forceful in doing that. That's what good leaders does. If you believe in something good, you have to make sure that is understood across the board. Of course, we cannot compare ourselves with the West, and that's why sometimes the West find it hard to understand who is the President Kagame as a leader, because they sometimes try to compare what takes place in the UK or US or in France and in Rwanda. None of those countries have suffered genocide in the last 26 years.
I would have to agree.
Very few countries have suffered the genocide in the last 26 years. So the people sometimes tend to lose. And they tend not to really get it when they talk about it.
It's that nuanced analysis of context, isn't it, that you're trying to put forward there? So you can't replicate what happened to Rwanda and how Rwanda has progressed in the last 26 years because not any other country is modeled on what happened to Rwanda. So what's happening is unique to Rwanda. And of course, Rwanda, Anais, go ahead,
Yeah, all I wanted to add is I think there's two sides to this. I think one, it's the fear of other. So the Western world, the nations that are making these comments, they don't really know, and they've never seen a president be a president for as long as Paul Kagame. So he's been essentially president for 26 years. That's a really long term. So I think that already is going to sort of discombobulate some people because they're like, well, how can he be president for that long?
I know we've only gone and had Queen for how many years? Yeah, but go ahead.
Exactly. So I think already that's going to affect how they perceive the country because they've maybe not seen that happen so much. But then there's also the other side where I think some people run the risk of placing Paul Kagame on a pedestal, but understand, how can you not do that? He literally saved our lives. Like, there's no other way to sort of look at that. He actually saved our lives, and he came through and did things that other nations wouldn't. And so I think people in that sort of respect forget that he's also human, and that he's still like the rest of us, and he still just cares about changing the narrative in his country and helping his people. And so I think it's very easy to, from the outside looking in, to be like, oh yeah, absolutely, he's a dictator, but he's not. He's just somebody who is literally flying by the seat of his pants, navigating a scenario that can't be replicated anywhere else, and figuring things out as he goes with his people, trying to find the best solution that he can with his government. And I love that he still obviously has input from everyone. And I know that the last election where he was, where they tried to decide whether or not he'd be president, he won by, I think it was 96% of
But
the vote.
speaking of the last election, I think the opposition leader, I've forgotten her name. You might know her name. I mean, she was missing for a bit there. What happened? What is the true story based on your Rwandese experience? Because my story would be very different to yours. So what's your narrative? I'm giving you this platform, Rwandans. Come on.
Well, let me answer that first. Just look at how you said it. You can't even remember the name of the opposition leader. That tells the whole thing.
I'm probably busy. I'm probably busy with so many right now. That's why I should. Go ahead.
if she was a credible opposition leader, surely you would have been able to know who she was. Unfortunately, we have these issues of having the so-called opposition leader promoted by outsiders. But if you go inside the country and ask people who are these so-called opposition leaders, they will actually say the same thing as you did. They will struggle to name who these people are, because
but why is that? Should a country like Rwanda really be thriving on opposition as well? Because it's done so in all these other aspects. Shouldn't it have a opposition that's vocal and
absolutely? And Rwanda has opposition, but again, it is there in the way that Rwanda has chosen to do things in their own way. We have a position based on a consensus and based on fictions and fighting that you normally find in all other African countries. We have more than I think 6, 7 opposition parties that are in government and the parliament. But for whatever reason, people don't tend to see these as opposition parties. Why? Because they are not on the street fighting and stopping life of Rwandans to go on a daily basis. That's what the West calls opposition. Opposition in the eyes of the West is a group that causes chaos and destruction. So we in Rwanda, we know the price of
or provide checks and balances, maybe.
Oh no! What? Name how many opposition parties in other parts of Africa that does what you say?
The Economic Freedom Front, for example, in South Africa, the DA in South Africa, the UPND in Zambia. I mean, the ZANU, the MDC in Zimbabwe. So, I mean, they do that. But what you're probably relaying is there's a concept of indaba. I don't know what it's called in East Africa, but in Southern Africa, indaba is the traditional way of sitting down to talk, even when you're on opposing ends. That's the sort of Southern African culture. You discuss and come to a consensus. So maybe it's that kind of principle that's applied within the houses, because you've got the chiefs as well being represented, the traditional leaders as well being represented in that kind of setup. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's what we have in Rwanda. We have people from all those different political views, but to have come to understand that for the country to move forward, yeah, they need to apply that type of politics, and then but the Rwandans are happy about that.
Yeah, I'm really getting worried that we're running out of time. But Anais, and do you think that maybe this is what we've lost in politics in general? We've lost that authentic sort of discussion system that we have traditionally in most African countries, especially sub-Saharan countries.
Yeah, definitely. I think, especially in this age of social media and everybody has an opinion and everybody is right, there's not many opportunities to discuss things and try to see opposite viewpoints. So like I can have a discussion with somebody and they might devolve into yelling and, you know, all that kind of stuff and name calling and everything. And I think that's a very Western cultural effect. I don't know if it's all parts of the Western world. Again, I can't speak for every country, but I have seen that sort of narrative, that trend. If you have Twitter, that's all you need to do is just open the Twitter app and you will see some of the madness that occurs there, with people sort of voicing their opinions rather than having a healthy discussion. And I think, I don't know that much about her, but I do know that there are a lot of people that have these kind of debates and then they in Rwanda and then they come to a conclusion like, okay, this actually works better, this idea sits better here, how about we revisit this in a few months and then rediscuss. And I think when the very little that I know is that when she came out to sort of challenge and, you know, be the challenger to the position, she didn't, I know that she did it a bit more combatively than maybe some have in the past. With certain personal references to Kagame, so it became more about, oh, he's not a great leader, or he's a dictator, and all that kind of stuff, and less about the policies and the change that she was trying to bring. I personally don't think she should have been put in prison, but I also see how a lot of Rwandans maybe wouldn't have voted her in as readily because, you know, Kagame has done so much for Rwanda. So if you're going to oppose him, maybe oppose him with actual sort of concrete steps. But again, my knowledge is limited. I don't live in Rwanda. So.
Can I jump on that quickly? She was not put in prison because of her standing against President Kagame. She was put in prison because of being found of manipulating her campaign. Basically, she used identities and the names of dead people, and that was discovered, and that turned out to be a crime that he had to pay for. So yeah,
with very convenient timing then.
Right.
I need to get back to my colleague Enoch here. Sorry.
Well, I think, you know, if we have to get into this debate, you know, we could go on and on and on. But the most important thing here is to remember that, you know, the genocide that happened in 1994 against the Tutsis, you know, we'll always remember our people that perished. You know, we'll remember, we'll renew, and we will unite as a people. So I thank you guys. You know, we're coming to an end. We only have a few minutes left. Thank you, Anais. Thank you, Eric. And Chiwa, thank you so much. You know, let's keep this spirit of remembering as well.